Hello everyone, this is Naerina from 40k Theories, and welcome to this new episode of 40k Lore for Newcomers. For this episode, nominated on Patreon by Commissar Michael, we will be taking a brief look at the Crimson Fists chapter of the Adeptus Astartes. This video will be a brief overview for certain events that may be explored in greater depth within additional videos within the future. So, without further ado, let's begin.
We have been wounded sorely, yet still we stand, with fire in our eyes and valor in our hearts. Let them think us beaten. We shall teach them otherwise.
The Crimson Fists are a loyalist chapter of the Adeptus Astartes created during the Second Founding and descended from the highly respected Imperial Fists Legion. Like all Space Marines, each and every battle brother of the Crimson Fists is a genetically enhanced transhuman super soldier, which is larger, stronger, faster, and more resilient than a baseline human. Of all the various Imperial Fist successor chapters, few are said to embody the defiant and valorous nature of the 7th Legion as well as the Crimson Fists. Indeed, much like their parent legion, the Crimson Fists have been known to battle on against the most insurmountable of odds. They fight in order to defend the Imperium against Xenos and traitor forces alike, even if such acts of stubbornness have driven the chapter close to extinction on more than one occasion. Despite battling against numerous foes over the course of their existence, the Crimson Fists would grow to become one of the Imperium's foremost experts in combating the Xenos known as the Orks, having battled the Greenskins across 10,000 different worlds. While such a specialization may have initially been somewhat unintended, it has also proven to be undeniably effective. Driven by their now intense passion to drive the Orks into extinction, the Crimson Fists have developed countless stratagems and tactics which have resulted in victory after victory against them. Despite strictly adhering to the tenets laid out within the Codex Astartes, the Crimson Fists nonetheless continue to uphold the legacy of their Primarch, leaving little doubt that they are true sons of Rogal Dawn in both body and spirit.
Those are the Xenos that our predators do not crush beneath their armored tread. We shall strike down ourselves with avenging bolt and righteous blade. Onward, Crimson Fists! Ever onward!
Following the civil war known as the Horus Heresy, Rabute Guilliman, the Primarch of the Ultramarines Legion, would seek to prevent such an event from ever occurring again. To this end, the Primarch would pen a text known as the Codex Astartes, a document which sought to reorganize the Space Marine legions into a number of smaller chapters. Rogal Dawn, the Primarch of the Imperial Fists, would initially refuse to adopt the tenets of the Codex, but after several days of pain-induced meditation, he would eventually relent to his brother's wishes. However, Dawn would not divide his legion's assets until the Battle of the Iron Cage. This was an attempt made by Dawn to bring his traitorous brother, Perturabo, the Primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion, back to Terra in chains. Following this particular conflict, which had ended in catastrophic failure for the Imperial Fists, the Legion would finally be divided into 6 chapters. They were the Crimson Fists, the Black Templars, the Excoriators, the Fist Exemplar, and the Soul Drinkers, as well as the chapter-sized incarnation of the Imperial Fists themselves. The Crimson Fists would be comprised primarily of those Imperial Fists who were regarded as being the Legion's most level-headed warriors, and the chapter would take their name from their first chaptermaster, Alexis Pollux, who was also known by the moniker of the Crimson Fist. Despite being now split into separate and distinct chapters, Rogal Dawn would establish a contingency plan for his sons to follow should Terra once again come under threat by the enemies of the Imperium. In such an event, the Sons of Dawn are to unite and reform the 7th Legion and stand as the Throne World's last and arguably greatest line of defense. This contingency would become known to the Crimson Fists as the Last Wall Protocol. For much of their existence, the Crimson Fists would remain as a fleet-based chapter, roaming across the vast expanse of the galaxy as they conducted various campaigns against Xenos aggressors, such as the Battle of Urulok Prime and the cleansing of HR 8518, the homeworld of a Xenos race known as Scythians. Approximately 1500 years after their founding, the chapter would take part in the War of the Beast, where they, along with their fellow Imperial Fist successor chapters, would enact the Last War Protocol at the command of Captain Corland, the last surviving Imperial Fist. The Crimson Fists would battle fiercely against the Orkish threat, along with their fellow Sons of Dawn in multiple engagements, including the first and second battle for Ulanor. Both assaults, however, would ultimately result in Imperial forces being driven from the world, with the latter of which resulting in the death of Corland, and, by extension, the extinction of the Imperial Fists. However, shortly after this, the Crimson Fists would donate a number of their assets, including warriors and gene seed stocks, to help reform the Imperial Fist chapter, before taking part in the third and final assault upon Ulanor, in which the Imperium would prove victorious. Centuries later, following the Age of Apostasy, the Crimson Fists would take part in the Crusade of Righteous Liberation, where they would retake those worlds that had been lost to the Imperium. However, this crusade would almost result in the chapter's total destruction, as only 128 Battle Brothers would survive the campaign. Nonetheless, the chapter would manage to rebuild and recover from their losses. Sometime after this, the Crimson Fists would come to focus their attentions upon a number of Ork empires along the borders of Segmentum Pacificus and Segmentum Tempestus, conducting a xenocidal campaign that would last for several centuries. Yet, as the chapter continued to wage their war against the Orkish hordes, their actions would inadvertently attract more and more of the Greenskins, with the Xenos being lured by the prospect of a good, long fight. This long series of xenocidal campaigns would finally come to an end around 745 M40, following the events of the Voltigan Crusade. In the aftermath of this crusade, the Crimson Fists would be rewarded for their heroism and bravery with stewardship over a prosperous agricultural world known as Rinsworld, located within the heart of the Loki sector. The Crimson Fists would then construct a fortress ministry upon the world's surface, which would henceforth serve as the chapter's homeworld. Little did the chapter realize, however, that within the next 1,000 years, their new home would come under assault from an old enemy.
If your life is given in the service to the Emperor, then your death shall not be in vain.
Over the course of their long and storied existence, the Crimson Fists would take part in numerous campaigns and crusades, such as the Battle of Steelcross, the Crusade of Vengeance, and the War of Beasts. However, the chapter's most notable series of battles would involve their homeworld of Rinsworld. After initially being granted stewardship of Rinsworld, the Crimson Fists would spend the next 1,000 years cleansing the Loki sector of many Orkish empires that lay within its depths, intent on eliminating any potential threats before they could escalate into a fully fledged war, the Orkish equivalent to an Imperial crusade. Sometime around 988 M41, an Ork warlord known as Snagrod, the self-proclaimed arch-arsonist of Caradon, would unite the shattered Ork tribes within the Loki sector into a massive war. After laying waste to a number of isolated worlds, this war would launch a full-scale assault against Rinsworld itself. The opening hours of the battle would prove disastrous for the Crimson Fists, as a plasma warhead launched by the Fortress Ministry's surface-to-air defensive systems would fly wildly off course and would make its way back to the monastery. The resulting explosion proved devastating, destroying not only the chapter's monastery, but slaying over 600 Battle Brothers. More worryingly, with the destruction of their fortress ministry, the majority of the chapter's reserves of gene stock were utterly obliterated. The surviving Crimson Fists would be forced to fall back to the world's capital of New Rin City, resulting in the war turning into a bloody siege. For over 500 days, the Crimson Fists would fight with the grim defiance and determination of Dawn himself, and while the other cities upon Rinceworld burned, the capital would remain in Imperial hands thanks to the efforts of the Crimson Fists and the surviving planetary defense force. Eventually, Snagrod would grow bored of this stalemate and abandon the war to seek out new conflict. Despite this, substantial Xenos presence would remain upon the world. After 18 months of grueling warfare, reinforcements from the Astra Militarum and at least 6 separate Space Marine chapters would begin to make planetfall, granting the Crimson Fists a much-needed respite. Eventually, Imperial forces would achieve victory against the Orks, although less than 100 Crimson Fists would survive to tell the tale. Over the next decade, the chapter would begin to rapidly replenish their losses, bringing their chapter strength up to approximately 500 Astartes, yet the chapter's homeworld would once again come under assault following the creation of the colossal warprift known as the Cicatrix Maledictum. A vast horde of demonic entities would lay siege to Rinceworld, and despite their odds for survival being bleak, the chapter would nonetheless battle fiercely to defend their world. Thankfully for the chapter, the forces of the Indomitus Crusade, led by none other than Rubicante Guilliman himself, would come to the chapter's aid. After driving the demons from Rinceworld, Guilliman would give the Crimson Fists with several companies of the newly developed Primaris Marines, granting the chapter the reinforcements that they so desperately needed. While the Crimson Fists remain somewhat under strength, the chapter's warriors are nonetheless ready, willing, and able to take the fight once more to the enemies of mankind.
Honor your chapter.
Of all Imperial Fist successor chapters, the Crimson Fists are arguably the one that most closely adheres to the tenets of the Codex Astartes. The only major deviation made by the chapter in this regard concerns the name and structure of their first company. This company, known in the chapter as the Crusade Company, always numbers at 128 warriors as opposed to the typical 100, in honor of those warriors who survived the Crusade of Righteous Liberation. In addition, the chapter master of the Crimson Fists will also serve as the de facto captain of the first company. However, following Pedro Kantor's ascension to the rank of chapter master that he holds to this day, the Crusade Company would have its own dedicated captain, as Kantor believes that splitting his time between his duties as chapter master and first captain would be doing a disservice to his chapter. As an Imperial Fist successor chapter, the Crimson Fists are known to regularly partake in a ceremonial tournament known as the Feast of Blades. This tournament will see each chapter descended from the bloodline of Rogel Dawn appointing a champion to partake in a test of skill and combat prowess, with the purpose of such a contest being to ensure that the bonds of brotherhood between each of the Sons of Dawn are strengthened and renewed. While Rinceworld may serve as the chapter's base of operations, the Crimson Fists do not recruit new battle brothers from the world's population due to the world itself being relatively peaceful by Imperial standards. Instead, the Crimson Fists will draw their recruits from the nearby world of Blackwater, a feral world filled with toxic swamps and deadly predators, which in turn produces a tougher and hardier people that are perfectly suited for life as an Astartes. Whenever the chapter makes planetfall upon Blackwater in order to scout for potential aspirants, the local populace will hold a festival in their honor, known as the Festival of the Bloodied Fist, presumably named in reference to the single red fist on most Battle Brothers' armor. As an Imperial Fist successor, the gene seed of the Crimson Fists is considered to be relatively pure and stable. Despite this, however, the chapter's gene seed is known to contain a number of zygote deficiencies, like most descended from the line of Dawn. Because of this, the Crimson Fists are unable to produce two of an Astartes' specialist organs, the Suzanne membrane and the Betch's gland, resulting in the chapter's warriors being incapable of entering a self-inducted state of suspended animation, as well as unable to produce an acidic saliva. And that concludes this episode of 40k Lore for Newcomers. If you like this video, consider supporting us on Patreon for more content. To those who are new to 40k, we hope you learned something. So, leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.